This is clearly one of those. Do you guys know about those zombie funguses that take over ants?
What?
Ophilia Cordyceps unilateralis.
Just rolls off the tongue, doesn't
Wait,
it?
is that from Hamlet?
It's the fungus that drowns itself in
Forgive me if
in
I'm
an
wrong.
ant brain.
That's the last track off Lateralis by Tool.
It is.
Correct. It's just the one that just sounds like aliens going down an elevator shaft, and then like tribal drums, and then
With the Art Bell sample?
no. This is actually a lot less funny than Tool. This is like a very serious thing that is actually pretty widespread. There's several different genuses of this kind of invasive parasitic fungus, or in some of these cases that I'm going to go into, just parasites in general that sort of take over the host of the, from what I've been reading, insects, but I'm sure it spreads beyond this, and the stories that I read were just like mind-boggling. So I'm gonna share a couple of those with you guys.
Sure.
So the one that I was talking about, Ophilia Cordyceps unilateralis, is the one that most people know about, the zombie ant fungus, and it basically infects the brain and body of a carpenter ant.
How?
By infecting it with a spore. The spore makes its way into the, I don't even know if it has blood, the internal mechanisms of an ant, and grows, essentially uses the ant's nutrients to multiply itself and grow into what they found out to be like cords, essentially, that kind of like flow through the muscle, the ligature of the ant.
So it's just like parasitic virus.
Correct. So again, going back to last episode, we also
And it's a spore, so anyone can breathe it in.
Right.
Oh,
Sweet.
Gross.
So it primarily affects the carpenter ant, but it's very similar to the Last of Us virus, right? That like, forcing someone to kind of adopt the behavior of whatever this organism is, right? So previously, before David Hughes got really into studying this fungus, it was thought that it takes over the brain of the ant and sort of takes over it completely. And the behavior that infected ants exhibit is that they will climb to a specific height on the jungle floor. It's 25 centimeters. They find them within millimeters of this exact same height under certain kinds of leaves that like foster this like fungal growth. And the ant will walk up, clamp its jaws where like perfectly so that the head is like sitting at 25 degrees or 25 centimeters above the jungle floor, and the spore column, I guess, will slowly consume the ant and grow out of that. Ideally, they try to line it up so that they are above the ant colony, so the spores rain down and
brutal
and collect other zombies, essentially, to continue the life cycle.
Oh, it's so disturbing.
So scary.
When these ants are affected, do they present with like syphilitic, like erratic motions?
So they have seen them. They are able to continue to function for the most part around the colony, but they do eventually, when it's time for the mature fungus to, I guess, expose itself and become the spore, the ant will just peel off from the group, walk up its stalk, and permanently, it says there's something locked where it clamps the jaws onto like the stem of this leaf, and then becomes essentially a feeding capsule for this fungus as it grows and distributes another spore to infect a future generation of ants.
So he makes it to work for a few weeks. He still goes to work for a few weeks. Everybody's like,
as it's going through,
something's really weird?
Like,
left arm's feeling weird. I don't know, man.
Bill's fine. He's fine.
Which Bill?
Bill.
Everyone's Bill and
A
Bob.
lot of ants are named Bill. A lot of people don't know that. The majority of ants are actually named Bill.
Bill, are you okay? Yeah, I just think a whole bunch of cocaine and some whores would really set me straight right now.
Bill,
my God, you've never talked like this before. And he just looks at me and goes, I'll be right back.
He just climbs up the wall.
So David Hughes is somebody who has spent a lot of time studying this, and recently they did a pretty exhaustive experiment on an ant where they julienned infected ants into slices that were 50 nanometers thick.
Okay, so
thousandths the width of a human hair.
Yeah, julienne cut is
Correct.
is a type of like cooking technique.
Bisectional or disectional, whatever.
Just,
it
just kind of
very thinly made a million slices of this tiny little ant.
Right. But like if you have a cucumber that's like that big, you will cut it at an angle that makes it dissectional cut.
Right, more surface area, right? So he had a student help him, Meridel Fredrickson, and she took the images, scanned each of them, and compiled essentially a three-dimensional model where they were able to correctly identify what was fungus and what was ant in this infected ant.
He's more fungus than ant, I tell you.
Right. So
Is it DNA cultures?
no. So they had to visually go in. They had it was a stain basically. So yeah, they went in and visually verified this is fungus, this is ant. And after taking 3 months on a single slide, they had to consult a engineer, Danny Chen, who developed an artificial intelligence program that was able to determine ant from fungus in these images. So they were able to like speed up the process a little bit. But when they found out, what they found out was that the ant is actually not being taken over completely. That the fungus specifically stops at the sort of motor cortex part of the ant brain, and that the remaining part, I guess, what you would consider the ant's consciousness, or the
So he's aware it's happening,
right? So
it's a nightmare.
Oh my God, that's
even worse.
The control of the ant body they think is done through a mixture of interaction with the actual motor part of the brain, and also they found that it's essentially just using it like a puppet. It's moving the arms and legs from within by constricting and pulling like certain muscles. The fungus is.
Oh, that's so
crazy.
disturbing.
But that's not unlike what I was talking about. What was it? The blue emerald cockroach wasp?
Yeah, that stabbed the antenna in, drove the antenna around that
Right.
guy?
Yeah,
Exactly.
But
it's a
this is
John
from
Deere tractor.
Except inside. He's doing it from the inside.
So then they were trying to understand how they got the ant to essentially exhibit this behavior that puts it in position to continue to create the spore, and they found that a certain chemical is being released. Is something that they're kind of just now starting to study, but it's not a physical connection with the ant part of the brain. It's a chemical. It's releasing this chemical that is influencing the ant to do these things, in addition to to excrete certain scents and continue to behave as part of the colony, etc. So
It's like a weird hybrid of like mental and physical, like brainwashing a little bit.
Right.
Just kind of like
then just-
reprogramming some things, but not all the things to do something.
and then just
master.
sprinkle in PCP and presto bingo.
Yeah.
you got yourself a zombie ant. So as horrifying as that is, that was not the most horrifying version of
What?
the parasitic sort of zombie effect
It
that
gets
insects
worse?
have. It gets way worse. This isn't
Way
even
worse.
the worst one. This one revolves around the European paper wasp, and it is the Polistis dominalis and Xenos vesparum. P. dominalis is the European paper wasp. It basically lives a normal wasp life. It's a piece of
Doing
shit.
wasp
That's
stuff.
being a dick.
It's a piece of shit its whole life,
yeah.
and you hate
Wasps
it.
are awful.
They're terrible.
They're terrible, angry beasts.
But they similar to other insects. They have they fall into castes, right? There's the queen and there's the worker and there's like drones. Exactly. So the worker wasp is the one that's particularly susceptible to the larva of the X vesparum fly, which
It's a fly taking down a wasp. That's fucking rogue as shit.
I like it.
it's a
I like
the larva form of this fly leaps onto the wasp, burrows into its abdomen where it will feed on the host blood. According to this article, I'm quoting by Brandon Kim.
Kumbaya.
He,
How do you spell it?
Keim.
Keem.
I'm quoting from his article. In the coming weeks, the larva grows stronger and stronger, but the wasp grows slowly, smaller than its peers with smaller wings. Becomes withdrawn. Other workers continue to forage, care for larval siblings, maintain the hive, and
Once
defend
again,
the
he
colony.
shows up to work but doesn't do the job right.
Right, you can tell something's wrong, like with this wasp, with this bill. So they lose any kind of interest in doing any of the social like caste work of the wasps. They start to just act essentially for themselves. They go out and eat and they hang out and they just chill. They lose any specific social behavior.
It's almost making it autonomous.
Right. When the queen wasps leave the nest to go for a... What is it? There's a certain...
They go for a spa day.
They go for, yeah, it's like it's the queen wasp spa day. They go feed. The infected wasps will also go, even though they're not queens, and they will essentially treat themselves like queens. They will fatten up.
Hell yeah, why not? They're like, really, all I gotta do is just fly with this?
I just want to get a pedicure. It's fine.
Yeah.
Well, it's to feed the like parasitic larva within them. This is like essentially taken over them and force them to do this. So the both the male and the female infected wasps will converge in a certain area, and the parasites will pop out and expose themselves long enough to reproduce between the wasps, and then usually the male one dies, leaving the male wasp to die. The female wasp will then go and be the fake queen with the other queens. Or she's a real queen, all right, fine, but she's a parasite queen.
She identifies as a queen.
So she will assume roles, right?
So she goes with the other queens, fattens herself up to appear to be a queen, and then goes to... She doesn't have any way to actually distribute wasp eggs, but she is able to distribute the parasitic larva that infects these wasps. So she goes into hives, masquerading as the queen, essentially, dropping these parasitic larvae that infect future wasps in hives. Or she'll... they said some of them don't necessarily do that. They'll just go out and drop them around like little time bombs, essentially, around like certain leaves that the wasps like to frequent for food.
Jeez.
Damn.
Some trifling shit.
Right? So yeah, in addition to that, there's a host of other like horrifying. There's a caterpillar in the Himalayas that, when it's infected with this fungus, plants itself. It basically sticks its head into the ground and does nothing and waits to die. And then the fungus consumes the dead caterpillar and turns it into a stalk that becomes a spore that then spreads to other caterpillars to infect them, to cause them to just plant their heads in the ground and die, to become food for this fungus.
Are all of these fungus, are they of the same classification, the same family?
They seem to have a similar, like, whatever, phylum description, genus description, but they do branch off. There is like some of the funguses are fungus, and then others are essentially like chemicals that are released by parasites that cause certain behaviors or behavior changes in the host body.
So all of these individual fungi evolved with different environmental factors in mind.
Correct.
Some had to get up high, and then obviously in the wasp, it had to be more parasitic.
Correct. I read one about a brand of parasite that lives in a certain snail that gets consumed by a type of bird, which distributes the larva back into the sort of freshwater area around the bay, which fish end up getting infected with their gills or something like that. But basically, this thing coats the fish's brain in itself. It reproduces and covers its brain. And fish that are infected with this are 30 times more likely to be caught by fish, eaten by fish, to continue the life cycle of this parasite, because it causes it to break away from the flock or flash itself up near the surface or leap from the water.
School. Not flock.
The flock. I was thinking...
I'm like, am I in the water right now, or am I in the air? Because all of a sudden I'm both.
Fish flock.
So the
Look, it's a big old flock of fish.
So these fish would kind of sacrifice themselves.
Correct.
For this parasite,
right. They would seek out warmer water closer to like shallower areas where there would be birds to consume them and continue the life cycle of this parasite.
How long until this evolves to human? How long until they figure out how to take one of us?
Weeks.
Yeah.
Because it's like a bad guy who just kind of sees some patterns and like kind of figures some things out and like, oh, these animals do this, so I'm going to like trick it and do this.
So should we follow this ant colony?